Yeah, they might do a ceasefire now, but they might lift sanctions now. But the day after midterms, they could attack again. They could reimpose sanctions. So,
Sure.
assuming ambient U.S. government hostility and desire to topple the Islamic Republic and preparing for the recurrence of armed attacks on Iran, military attacks, is what they're doing.
Imagine you're the leader of a Western country, let's say France or Germany or Italy or the UK, or even like Japan or Korea, South Korea, one of the major, not Western, but industrialized countries that is part of that whole globalized financial and economic system that includes the United States and other countries as well. And you have an approach from the United States government. Let's say Scott Bessent gives you a call and says, hey, we're putting these massive sanctions on Iran and we want you to join in. And you're going to be like, okay, so what's the point of these sanctions? Oh, well, the point of the sanctions is regime collapse. Regime collapse. And you're basically in Germany or Italy or the UK or France, and you hear regime collapse. The goal of the sanctions is to collapse the regime. Now think about that. What will that mean? What does regime collapse mean? What does it mean when a regime collapses? I'm a foreign correspondent. I've seen what regime collapse means. It means that a country descends into complete chaos. It means that, like in Libya or Iraq, bands of teenagers go into military bases and loot all the AK-47s and other heavy weapons even, and take them for themselves and sell them on the black market or start using them against each other. It means that people with guns start cordoning off neighborhoods or towns and declaring little autonomous zones, and in the name of protecting themselves, kill a bunch of people. They start settling scores from 10, 20, 30 years ago, use the opportunity to seize land and seize other people's properties. It means chaos. It means hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people fleeing to the other countries, neighboring countries, fleeing to Europe. And also in the case of Iran, it means that oil production is disrupted, energy production is disrupted. Perhaps the Strait of Hormuz is even further disrupted as you have bands of militias roving around because the regime has collapsed and there's no one in charge. So I don't understand why you would do this. Why you would agree to put maximum sanctions on Iran, to agree to the U.S. scheme, the Treasury Secretary's scheme, Donald Trump's scheme, this foundation for the defense of democracy, vision for putting pressure on Iran by collapsing the regime. I don't understand what country would agree with that. Unless you're Israel. I don't think that Russia or China would do it on principle, but also because they are making good money off of Iran and have a good security partnership with Iran. I'm Borzou Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzou.substack.com. I'm also available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. In this really great episode, I have an interview with Alan Iyer. He's a former U.S. State Department official, an Iran expert. For years, he charmed the world, really, with his very good Persian on social media, serving as a kind of ambassador, a cultural ambassador. And also, he was involved in the negotiations. He was an advisor to the negotiations that led up to the 2015 nuclear deal. And this is part one of that interview. I think I'm going to make it mostly for paid subscribers only. Maybe in a month or two, I'll open it up. But hey, this is a really good opportunity if you want to subscribe to Badlands. And, you know, it's only $5 a month or $50 a year. Sanctions and the effect of the sanctions and the efficacy of those sanctions are the main topic of this edition of Badlands. As I explained in a couple of interviews with Pakistan TV and India's NewsX World, sanctions work when there's some kind of obtainable and desirable goal. For example, in the run-up to the 2015 nuclear deal, you had so many countries participating in the sanctions that Barack Obama put together, the Barack Obama administration to put together, in part because they had a goal. The goal was we want limits on Iran's nuclear program. And at that time, the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was rather belligerent. But even the negotiations between Iran and the U.S. began under Ahmadinejad. They didn't go very well until Hassan Rouhani took power in Iran as the president. But that period, the sanctions got the buy-in of much of the world, including Russia and China, in part because they seemed like there was a reasonable goal. And I think that Barack Obama had built up trust with U.S. adversaries as well as U.S. friends. He had their trust that, look, I'm not going to use these sanctions as a way of launching a military kinetic war. I'm not going to do anything stupid. The sanctions are the sole purpose of these sanctions is to get Iran to the negotiating table and make a deal. That, plus the fact that the U.S. shifted its opinion on whether or not Iran could have enrichment on its soil, made that 2015 deal possible. Right now, you're in a situation where Donald Trump doesn't know what he wants. He got offered a deal that was, according to the two diplomats who were in the room at the time, even better than the one the Iranians gave to Barack Obama. And he rejected that in favor of a nihilistic war with Benjamin Netanyahu. And then on that first day of that war, the United States bombed a school full of children and their parents and teachers, killing 168 people, most of them children, many of them schoolgirls just attending primary school. They lost the goodwill of the world at that point. And at that point, the Iranians took advantage of the situation and did something that perhaps they've been toying with for many years. They took control of the Strait of Hormuz and are basically blackmailing the entire world. They're holding the entire world economy hostage. No one's going to acknowledge that. No one's going to admit to that in Iran, that they're holding the world hostage. But they were able to do it. And guess what? No one is really that upset at them because they're like, hey, in a way, the Iranians had a right to do this because they were attacked and they took that advantage. So the goodwill is actually with Iran and not with the United States. President Donald Trump has betrayed every single country in the world. He betrays Canada. He screws Mexico. He launches CIA black ops all over the world. He's shown himself to be perhaps a rogue actor in many instances in Venezuela with regard to Cuba. There's so many examples of Donald Trump fucking over other countries, even friends. So who's going to trust him? Who's going to trust him to do the right thing if these sanctions are imposed? Sanctions will only work when there's international buy-in. No one is going to go along with these sanctions. So I think that the efficacy of these sanctions is very much in doubt. Now, the Americans are saying the sanctions in combination with a blockade has never been tried before. I think that is accurate. Let's see how effective these sanctions are. Let's see how effective these blockades are. The Americans are finding workarounds around the Strait of Hormuz. They are moving oil from ship to ship to ship, from private ship to government ship that is not in such need of insurance, that is willing to take more risks, back to the private ship once they get past the gauntlet of rockets and drones along the Persian Gulf, along the Strait of Hormuz. And they're basically finding a workaround. They're being creative. Let's see what kind of creative workarounds the Iranians find to get their oil to market and to get goods into the country. There's a lot of options out there. And crucially for Iran, unlike under the period of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, there's a lot of global sympathy for Iran. There's a lot of interest in Iran from the global south. And I think that that is something that's very important and very unique and very different to the last round of sanctions that the U.S. imposed on Iran when Iran was sort of seen as this belligerent actor under President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Anyway, I spoke about these issues in a couple interviews, first with Pakistan's TV, Pakistan State TV. They have some really good questions and some really smart journalists. And I will play that interview right now.
Borzo, we're talking about resilience of Iran, Washington's plan of these overdrive as far as sanctions are concerned. Can they face them and how long, considering the past, their resilience, and of course, the fact that this can potentially rope in third partners, third countries like China? How do you look at it?
The sanctions on Iran have worked in the past when they were in the context of international sanctions that were respected and honored by other countries. Those include the sanctions that led up to the 2015 nuclear deal, and those had the participation of both Russia and China and their imprimatur of the UN Security Council. These sanctions now have none of that. As a matter of fact, Russia and China and many other parts of the world are looking at these sanctions as part of the the U.S. regime change policy. They don't want regime change in Iran. They don't want regime collapse, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described it. They know that they will pay the price for that. Eurasia will pay for the price of the collapse of the Iranian regime in terms of security problems and refugee flows. So there's not going to be a lot of international buy-in. Those 2011 to 2015 sanctions also worked because there was some incentive for Iran. Barack Obama said, hey, look, there's a deal. We can talk about it. And look, we're being flexible. We're going to renege on our commitment to ban you from enriching nuclear fuel on your soil. Look, we're offering you a decent deal. And so Iran agreed to that. This time around, there's no trust whatsoever. It looks like Donald Trump just wants a break before the midterms. And there's a very real possibility that if Netanyahu is elected and Trump's losses are not so bad, they will resume the war come November 5th.
But in terms of countries like China, you think that they will be acceding to what the U.S. wants?
There's absolutely no incentive for China and Russia unless the U.S. promises more sanctions on these Chinese teapot refineries, these off-the-books gray zone refineries, more sanctions on second-tier and third-tier banks in China. I think that could be a little bit intimidating for China, but China has its own weapons at its disposal. And as I said, because the goal is regime collapse and not some kind of nuclear deal or some kind of diplomatic arrangement, because Donald Trump and his bootlickers, his adjutants, his fanboys in the think tank world have said that regime collapse is their aim, what country in the world is going to agree to that? Even if you're a European country that's somewhat hostile to the Iranians and to the Iranian regime, if you know that the goal of these sanctions is to cause the collapse of this regime and cause millions of refugees to flow into Europe, what country like France or Germany is going to agree to that, even if they pretend to?
So if the U.S. targets companies potentially and banks and intermediaries, do you expect this to be a major disruption as far as Iranian oil revenue is concerned?
It could hurt, but I think that what history has shown us and what the last 20 years have shown us is that the Iranians have become experts in sanctions evasion, finding mechanisms around that, bartering mechanisms. And guess who else they have on board? Russia. Russia has also been sanctioned to death, so to speak. And so Russia and Iran, along with North Korea, there's this axis of bad guys that the U.S. has created, which creates a large market if you include China and the stands in that. There's quite a bit of spaces in the Middle East and Central Asia and Eurasia where Iran could find workarounds. They'll be expensive. The Iranian people will suffer. But the Iranian regime, knowing that it faces this existential battle, will attempt to evade these sanctions.
In terms of the domestics, do you think the hardliners can potentially strengthen that kind of hardliner approach that we've seen and potentially move Iran further away from wanting to negotiate? It could have that kind of effect also. And the domestic situation within Iran, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a huge domestic debate going on right now. There's a very lively debate going on within the elite circles of power. You have, for example, the Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bakr Ghalibaf, and the President, Masoud Pezeshkian. They're saying, look, this is going to be really tough. It's going to be really tough on the people. This period of sanctions, what Donald Trump is talking about, the maximum economic pressure that they're talking about, we should cash in our chips. We have built up some leverage. We control the Strait of Hormuz. We've destroyed U.S. bases in the region, and we should be more enthusiastic about some kind of deal with Trump. On the other hand, there are these hardliners. There is another faction. There are the IRGC generals, Revolutionary Guard, military commanders, and hardliners in the judiciary and the clerical establishment who are like, you know what? No. We don't trust Donald Trump. And even if we make a deal with them, what's the guarantee that he's not going to break the deal the next day? So there's a debate going on right now, even like today, if you read the Iranian press. So there is no democracy in Iran, but there is definitely domestic politics. Sometimes it can be a blood sport. And this issue is front and center right now. Should they cut some kind of deal with the United States? Can they stand this pressure? How much can they stand this pressure? All of that is up for debate inside Iran, as it is within the Washington think tank world.
But what about other countries and the potential of alienating those as far as Washington is concerned? Do you think that President of the U.S. doesn't care at this point in terms of how it's going to go down with other countries, those that have even been part of the diplomatic process, if it does extend? How do you look at that?
Well, I mean, look, over the last week or so, the president of the United States has threatened to bomb Oman, which has been a longtime partner of the United States. It has downgraded war games with South Korea. American soldiers spilled blood to keep South Korea in the Western fold, to prevent North Korea from invading during the 1950s. And Donald Trump praised Kim Jong-il, the leader of North Korea, and talked about him as this great guy, acknowledging and legitimizing the arsenal of nuclear weapons he has. So I don't think a lot of countries are in the mood for trusting the United States right now. He's no Barack Obama. He's not going to go out there and charm countries into agreeing to multilateral sanctions against Iran. He's going to alienate countries. He's going to try to bully them and cause resentments. I mean, there is an issue of sovereignty. Who is the United States to tell India or Pakistan or China who they can trade with? I think there's going to be that attitude at this point. And there's another consideration as well, and I think this is really important. I think a lot of what Donald Trump and Scott Bessent and Pete Hegseth are doing right now, it's a communications exercise. It's a way to extricate the United States from the military phase of the war while appearing tough. So they can keep the Washington think tank crowd that they listen to. They can keep the Fox TV hosts happy while they perform what they see as an exit from the Middle East in the face of losses to Iran and gross miscalculation in entering this war.
Borzo, what you know of the domestic situation within Iran, how much of the burden is actually being felt by ordinary citizens, Iranian citizens at this time? When we talk about the cost of these sanctions, the cost of them accelerating also, and what's happening at this time?
Yeah, I think most of the burden is falling on the middle classes, the educated people, the people who are salaried employees of institutions, the people who are very poor get subsidies from the government, and the people who are regime elites and oligarchs, they take care of themselves. So if you're a guy who goes and works at a bank or a university and you get a salary and you pay your taxes, you're getting hurt by this. If you're a small shopkeeper who never pays his taxes, if you're a poor person who is on charity and benefits from the government, you're going to feel less pain and less change in your life than that middle-class educated people. Ironically, those middle-class educated people are exactly the constituency that Donald Trump and the West wants to see take over Iran. That's not going to happen if this crowd is weak and desperate and looking for economic relief. And so I think in a way, these sanctions will be counterproductive to U.S. aims in Iran. Now, just a brief interview with one of my favorite broadcasters and anchors, Ruby Barlow of NewsX World. Nice, concise interview about the security matters in the country and about the role of the Revolutionary Guard in Iran.
There's been this shift in military doctrine that is from defensive to an offensive strategy that's reported from the Iranian army. What do you think this means for the conflict as well?
Well, I think it just makes it more dangerous, more volatile, less predictable. And that's the part of the Iranian objective. They don't want the Americans to be able to guess their main move. Look, if you look at the last few years of this conflict between the United States and Iran, you've had a situation where the U.S. or Israel would do something to Iran, and Iran would reply in a kind of measured or even de-escalatory way. And the Iranian conclusion after the 12-day war and this particular war is that action, that behavior on the part of Iran was a huge mistake, because it gave the impression to the Americans and the Israelis that Iran was weak, it was this paper tiger and so on, that it didn't have a lot of capacity, that it had a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And so now they've realized that with aggression, with basically taking a more escalatory approach, they can intimidate the U.S. And also, I would have to say that the Iranians in the last conflict, in the last round of the conflict, they showed capabilities that no one expected that they had, especially when it came to the precision of their strikes and the targeting. No one really knew that they had this ability, for example, to hit directly on U.S. bases as far as Jordan and hit a dormitory full of U.S. soldiers and to hit aircraft from a couple thousand kilometers away. This was not something that was predicted. I don't even think many Iranians knew that they had this capability. They might have developed it or refined it on the fly as the conflict continued, as their tactics evolved. So I think that they're finding that they have a certain military prowess that they didn't expect. Will that military prowess provide them with the breathing space they need to manage the economic troubles that they're facing? That's another question.
Bozu, what about the role of the IRGC in this as well? Of course, the army and the IRGC are separate apparatus inside of the Iranian regime. How do you think that this new military doctrine from the army reflects their role inside of the Iranian government, and how might this contrast with the IRGC's function?
Ruby, I've always thought, at least for the last 20 years or so, that this distinction between the IRGC and the government and the army was a bit of a fiction. The IRGC took control of the army many years ago, and it's effectively not really an independent outfit anymore, if it ever was one in the Islamic Republic. I also think that there's this sort of attempt on the part of the neoconservative think tank world and Washington policymakers to make a distinction between the IRGC and the rest of the Iranian political establishment. The IRGC is so integrated into Iranian society and politics and culture even that it's ridiculous to even make a kind of distinction. It has so many tentacles and so on. And there's also, I think, a little point in making that distinction. There are some people in the IRGC who are just like 19-year-old draftees who are fulfilling their military service. And then there's others who are hardline ideological, committed to the Islamic Republic, and they're very pro-regime, fanatically pro-regime even. So it's just as much varied and as much textured as the rest of Iranian society and the government. So I think it's just not a distinction worth making anymore, except as a way of demonizing a certain institution. And on the part of, for example, U.S. policymakers say, hey, we're not going after the Iranian people. We're just targeting the IRGC. That's a fiction. And here's that interview with Alan Iyer. Alan is someone that I've watched for a long time. He's a very charming guy, very smart guy. I had no idea that this guy is 68 years old. Look at how young he looks. Wow, mashallah, good genes, bro. And his thinking is sharp. He's a think tank guy right now, but he has been a longtime U.S. diplomat, part of the Foreign Service of the United States. And just listen into part one of the interview. Part two I'll put up in a few weeks. Alan, we've had this cycle. It's like sanctions, diplomacy, war, sanctions, diplomacy, maximum pressure. It looks like we're settling again on maximum pressure again. Then this scheme where we're going to put secondary sanctions. We're going to stop any country, punish any country that does any business with Iran. It sounds familiar. Am I wrong? It sounds like something that has been tried before. And then there's all the questions. What kind of business? A country sells food to Iran, buys food from Iran. We're not going to accept that. Or is it more about like strategic goods and so on? What do you think of the latest policy turn by the Trump administration?
Well, again, as someone who's been following Iran for a long time, I see a sort of a phase change starting with June of 2025 and the actual attack on Iran by Israel and the United States. Then obviously the February 2026 war going forward, and that forced Iran to change its strategy. I think the U.S. administration's decision to go to war against Iran was a massive strategic mistake, of a piece with many other strategic mistakes this administration has done, both domestically and in foreign policy. I think when this administration's initial assumptions didn't pan out, it's been flailing strategically ever since. It thought that military superiority over Iran would translate into strategic success. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And now at this point, with Iran's ability to threaten maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, this administration is trying just to return to the status quo pre-February 28th of 130 ships a day passing event-free through the Strait of Hormuz. That's not happening because Iran has seized on the strait as a key form of strategic deterrence. So because President Trump cannot escalate militarily now because he fears consequent Iranian retaliation against Gulf energy targets, he's forced to what he says is low-keying it by a very effective blockade on Iran's ports, which is strangling Iran's economy, which, as you know very well, was doing horribly even before the war. The problem is that, as we say in war, the enemy has a vote, and the current Iranian leadership is not going to allow this to continue until it capitulates and moves closer to U.S. red lines. It will at some point, if the blockade evokes sufficient pain, escalate against Gulf country targets in an effort to get the U.S. to lift the blockade. So, yeah, it's a fraught situation. As my colleague Mona Yacoubian says, this Trump administration has made the Middle East far more Hobbesian than it was before this war.
Hi, I'm Borzu Daragahi, host of the Badlands podcast and writer of the Badlands newsletter. You can find me on Spotify. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on Substack. That's where I'm usually at Borzu, BORZOU.substack.com. Now, I'm trying to get people to upgrade their subscriptions and get paid subscriptions. I have enough ethics that I wouldn't put my lovely teenage daughter in this video in a bid to encourage people to upgrade, to show what a nice person I am and how I'm deserving and I need a little bit of extra cash to help take care of my life and keep doing this work. But I am shameless enough to show you my daughter's cute puppy, lovely puppy, Bella. Hey, Bella. Hey, Bella. Good doggy. This is such a good dog. Such an amazing puppy. She's super, super sweet, super nice. I don't know what this has to do with geopolitics, but I know that she's a super lovely puppy. And if I could get a little bit of cash to help pay for her treats and her training. Hey, puppy. Good puppy. I love puppies. And if you love puppies too, maybe you should subscribe to Badlands. Get a paid subscription as a gift for anyone in your life who might be interested. Thank you so much. But what do you think, though? I mean, is this Scott Bessent had this huge announcement? They had this drum roll with this new policy. Does what the Trump administration seem to be announcing, this effort at, I guess, strengthening secondary sanctions, does that look like something new and could potentially cause even more pain for Iranians than before? Or does it look rather familiar?
Well, it's familiar, but again, just to give the devil his due, just because a policy hasn't worked up until now doesn't mean it won't ever work.